Since today's Halloween, I figured we would talk about card art on Yu-Gi-Oh cards and how it has really changed throughout the years and some of my little perspectives on this. Make sure you guys smash the crap out of that subscribe button so you guys don't miss out more on this content. Now, throughout time, culture changes. You see that Yu-Gi-Oh has changed as well. Now, I'm not going to go too heavily into editing here, but this is going to be pretty much a discussion about how we went from that darker era of cards. You know, if you look back at like Pharaoh's Servant, some of these other previous eras in the game, you definitely noticed a couple of particular things about the game. Art was a lot darker in that time. Now remember, the very beginning sets in the game were tied much more to the anime versus now where, you know, we don't even have an anime. We're just kind of spinning around on cultural phenomena out here and things like that. But good examples of some of the more scary art in time. You had Newdoria, Jurigato. Actually, Jurigato wasn't one of the more newer ones, but they basically, it kind of fit the theme for like Merrick's cards almost. You know, like these dark fiend monsters that definitely represented darker times. Now, I understand, you know, a shift in demographic has to occur eventually because, you know, we obviously had censorship in art throughout the years as well. You know, you've seen Booba being reduced in terms of card art. You know, you have to adjust from one side of the market to the other, from, you know, the OCG Japan side to America and censorship to kind of make things a little bit more peaceable. Granted, over time that we've definitely let up a lot more on that particular. That's why the Lost Art series exist. It's definitely good to see that, though. So, why has Yu-Gi-Oh art, you know, shifted so dramatically throughout the years? And I honestly think the answer to that is, besides, you know, culture changing, company changing, you know, the world evolving and changing, you can follow the arcs within the show. You know, the original Yu-Gi-Oh had a much darker, gloomy approach to it, you know. DM era was definitely a rough time. And then you kind of shift on into Jaden. The school arc was cool. It had some dark undertones. I mean, like, you know, Season 4 Jaden, the one we never got to experience, was definitely the best part of that show. You know, I'm just going to be honest with you, like, Season 4 Jaden being the badass that he was, really made that show. And you did have a lot of dark undertone. But when you go from Duel Monsters era to GX, you definitely see that they kind of hold back. Same thing kind of the 5Ds era. You see, you still have that dark underlining tone, but it comes much later in the show, you know, so you will start to see big shifts in dramatic story. I feel like as each story went along, things became, obviously, I would say more like friendly to, you know, your average friendly duelist. You know, by the time Zexal was rolling around, I mean, things were a lot more family friendly versus the beginning of the story. So the overall ties of the show, starting off very dark throughout the years, has definitely, it's become a lot more light-hearted, I feel like. Don't get me wrong, I mean, like, you had some pretty dark underlying tones in you know, Link Brains. I will say that was probably one of the more darker ones that we'd kind of seen near the end. Just kind of be fair about that, but this is kind of my personal opinion there. So, as the series go on, things become more lighthearted. You know, we change the pace as time goes on. And then there's the cultural implications of this as well, which I think is like the more interesting thing about this. You can definitely tell, compared to many years back, that art now on cards, you have infinite more waifus than you once had. And I hate to tell you this is something that I understand Yu-Gi-Oh players don't like hearing, but waifus, they sell. Alright, it's, why do you think a majority of the Starlights that come across these sets as of the last couple of years here, there have been way more waifus than like cool dragons? Because people want their waifus. I know. As of right now, we live in this culture where, like, the VTubers are taking off. You know, people want their anime waifus. And if you're a card game like Yu-Gi-Oh, you're going to take note of this. You're like, oh my gosh, you know, if we print good cards on the waifu cards or make them semi-playable, we also make them in high rarity, more people are going to buy this product because they want to get these waifus. Is it good marketing? Yeah. I mean, if you have a player base that wants to pick up these kind of cards, that's, I think, a good thing. All right, you know what you're marketing to. You've adjusted throughout time here. That's why I said, we bring up the point here of, as each show went more lighthearted and, as cultural and times change here, you see that the waifus end up being the best. Now, one interesting thing I do want to bring up here was Spellbound. If you guys saw the recent TCG exclusive, Spellbound definitely feels like a homage back to that older days of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that's one cool thing here that a lot of people, were definitely, here, I have a Spellbound right next to me. It's kind of showcase that. Look at that. Look at that beautiful art. This feels more like a very basic homage back to the original dark days of Yu-Gi-Oh! And we haven't really, most Floodgates now, I mean, Destructive Darumaka was also a TCG exclusive, but you can tell by a lot more of the marketing that they're focusing on the waifus. And that's not to say that you won't get little homage pieces like this every blue moon. I mean, that's the thing, but your main core storyline, the Ecclesia storyline, lovable waifu that everybody likes. You have the little Albaz, been betrayed by the church, for example, for your storyline here. And it's just kind of like their journey and then all of the adventures that, you find them on. But I mean, you have waifus generally involved in the story arc. Pretty famous ones too, Fleur-de-Lis, Ecclesia, everybody's rooting for them to make it to the end of the story. It's the same thing with the World Chalice arc. I will say though that I think the Albaz lore has been more popular than the Orcus lore. Maybe it's just the time change here and seeing how, we've shifted from not so much talking about that lore to this one, because I definitely feel like the Albaz lore is a lot more appreciated and people are a lot more happy with that. And then you have the eternal struggle of the fan favorite. Sky Striker meets the requirements for the waifu series. Massive max rarity. No matter how many times this deck seems to, get obliterated off the face of the planet, people still talk about it. People aren't happy that it exists, but it meets that criteria of being a good deck and waifus. And when Sky Striker first came out, I mean, when you read Engage, saw it not perform in a once per turn, it was one of the craziest decks we'd seen in a very long time. But once again, people looked at it and they're like, well, this is the change in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now. It's you have the waifus being the best. Years ago, it's oh yeah, Dark Arm Dragon and Judgment Dragon. So it's been a pretty anticlimactic change, I should say. I'm not really surprised to see it. It's the fall of dragons, fiend monsters to, now you have VTubers in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! But once again, that's what's selling right now. Those are the cultural changes. And then, I mean, you'll get things every so often, like True Elemental, you'll spin back into the waifu series. You're oh my gosh, an amazing waifu deck that just imbalances the game. And then you're oh, the Ishizu cards. You're oh, we get a homage back to original Yu-Gi-Oh! And then you're oh yeah, these go great in my waifu deck. It strengthens it. Now I get to play I would say maybe the Ishizu cards and Spellbound are your more recent things, because those Ishizu cards are definitely an amazing callback to original Yu-Gi-Oh! And I honestly think that they're definitely crazy powerful to the power scaling that the crazy BS that original Yu-Gi-Oh! Was known for, man. That's the crazy part. But throughout time and space here, I think you're going to continue to see art on the cards evolve. I think you will see us continually get further away from the original, monsters that you really felt here, because more people want more waifus. It's not necessarily saying that I want more waifus within the game, but your player base wants to spend more money. They want to pick up, a literal JPEG that literally talks to you and gets angry at you. Yeah, trust me, when I look at my Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, I'm disappointed in me too for how much money I've spent. It'd be like that. So the voices of the cards are definitely telling me, how could you, Robbie? So overall, when to have this discussion, I think it was it's definitely interesting just to kind of take a little step back, see how the card game has evolved, cultural changes, the new hot sauce, like VTubers, and how they are changing the landscape culture and how card games want to capture this landscape. So Guys, please leave a comment about how much you guys think, and I hope you're having a good Halloween. Patrons, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos.